Well, single parents, the elderly, people with disabilities, housing authorities are supposed to be there to help low-income families that can barely get by.
But a community watchdog investigation uncovered the people who need the help most. We're talking people who make on average around $11,000 a year are in some cases on a lengthy waiting list, while those who've conquered poverty are in some cases really taking advantage of your tax dollars.
We found 67 housing authority households across the region that are above federal poverty guidelines, even after you consider the number of people living in the home.
And of those, children in 48 government apartments don't even qualify for free and reduced lunches. 12 families make more than $50,000 a year. One in Bristol, Tennessee has lived in public housing for 17 years. In this special community watchdog report, Nate Morabito found out some government renters may be overstaying their welcome.
This is not what I wanted for my family.
Yet here Brittany DeLargy sits outside the Johnson City Housing Authority with her 3-year-old son and a baby on the way.
You got to do what you got to do when you're a mama and a wife.
With her husband out of a job and her income just $800 a month, her family is behind on rent and will soon have to leave this house.
I really need to get in somewhere immediately, especially with me being pregnant and having a 3-year-old. I don't want to be homeless with them.
That brings her here to fill out an application for government housing. She joins a waiting list of 215 other people just like her, desperate to find a home. Some may have to wait more than a year for a place to rest their heads. Meanwhile, people who make much more than her are sleeping easy in a government apartment.
It's very aggravating.
The Johnson City Housing Authority is home to the largest number of households that made the most money last year. 7 took home more than $50,000, and 1 made almost $77,000 last year.
That's way over what I'm making, and I'm doing the best I can.
The Housing Authority says those people came here, in some cases years ago, looking for help. Thanks to the government's assistance, they've since improved their situation.
That was the goal. While they came here, they've achieved their goal. It'd be a good time for them to move on, you know, and do what they can if their situation allows them to do it.
Now, the executive director thinks some of them are making enough to move out and buy their own home, which would open the door for those who really need a place to stay.
Sure, I think that's our purpose here, is to provide low-income people that are struggling with housing. That's our goal.
Richard McLean believes some of these people are standing in the way of that, maybe even milking the system.
You're not saying that all of them are taking advantage, but you feel pretty confident that some of them are taking advantage.
Possibly some are.
By law, the Housing Authority can't kick these people out, but it can encourage them to move. That's why the Housing Authority is raising rates for some of its tenants beginning September 1st.
What you're saying is the government has served its purpose for these higher income people.
Yes, I think so.
And they should move out and allow people who do need those facilities to move in.
We presented our findings to Congressman Phil Rowe, who wondered if something needs to change at the federal level.
Get the IG, the Inspector General, to look at the housing all over the country and find out this going on.
The congressman promised action, starting with Congress's Oversight Investigation Subcommittee.
Subsidized housing, that means that somebody's helping pay for your rent. That means a taxpayer is. We should be helping the neediest of people.
He says if the problem is in fact widespread, the only solution would be to set income limits, something he says might be a good idea.
People, as they go up the income ladder, which is a great thing, that means you're a taxpayer and so forth. I think you need to move out of public housing into the private sector with the rest of us.
Congressman Morgan Griffith was also alarmed. In a statement, he said, "This is a matter of concern. I will review the law to see whether any changes are needed or if this is an enforcement issue. Either way, it must be fixed so that people who really need the assistance receive it."
It is aggravating at times because you know there's people here that make more than enough money.
Despite her frustration, DeLargy is sympathetic, too.
What if those people have mental disabilities, or what if they're disabled themselves?
After all, no matter their situation today, these people were at one point in her shoes. But she says no one has to worry about her overstaying her welcome.
I don't want to live here forever.
Right.
I don't. I'd like to have my own house where my kids can say, this is my house and I grew up here.
She promises once she's off the waiting list, she'll only stay as long as necessary. Nate Morabito, News Channel 11, in your corner.
One more note, Housing Authority members tell us that as some of the higher income households tend to have bad credit, that keeps them in public housing longer. At the least, Johnson City wants those people to improve their credit so they can eventually get their own place. And some additional perspective for you, the latest Department of Commerce per capita numbers for the Tri-Cities from 2011 show the average person in our region makes just $33,035 a year. Considering people who live in area housing authorities have access to reduced rent and utilities, child and medical care, someone could argue that some of those people who receive government aid are better off financially than the average person in the Tri-Cities.
A News Channel 11 investigation prompts a congressman to call for changes to public housing policies. Back in July, News Channel 11 discovered dozens of people living in public housing had incomes that exceeded the allowable amount that qualified them for the assistance. In fact, 12 families made more than $50,000 a year. 3 of those families took in more than $60,000 annually. Dr. Phil Rose sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development yesterday. The letter says in part, quote, WJHL, a network news outlet in my district, recently reported an alarming high number of people living in government-subsidized housing whose income now exceeds the allowable amount that qualifies them for the assistance. I request that you look into this matter and report your findings to Congress, end quote. Congressman goes on to say now that there are hundreds of desperate families in Johnson City alone who are eligible for assistance, but who are unable to get access to housing. He goes on to say, I believe we need an understanding for how pervasive this problem is so that Congress can consider any necessary corrective action, end quote.
They started with nothing, but over time, thanks to the government's help, became successful. And now they make enough money to buy their own home, but they don't. Good evening, I'm Josh Smith.
And I'm Sarah Diamond. Instead, they get government services. They take up public housing units, while the poorest of the poor are forced to wait on lengthy waiting lists. Tonight, we're learning the problem is not just confined to the big cities in our region. It's an issue in a small Tri-Cities town as well as all across Tennessee. Now, you may remember our special community watchdog report back in July. It revealed people making a lot of money living in public housing. The original report sparked Congressman Phil Rowe to call on the Inspector General to open a federal investigation to see if that problem is in fact widespread. The Inspector General's office is still reviewing that request. In addition, other television stations across the nation have started similar investigations. And in the meantime, Nate Morabito found out the problem is even more widespread than we originally thought. Right, Nate?
Yes, Sarah. You know, our original report found the majority of people who made the most money in the area's largest housing authorities lived in the Johnson City Housing Authority. 7 took home more than $50,000 last year, and 1 made almost $77,000. Well, we were curious if people living in smaller housing authorities made big bucks. In Elizabethton, some do. We also wanted to know about the state's biggest cities. Across Tennessee, we found a common theme.
I don't feel guilty about being here because I need the assistance.
Unfortunately, not everyone who lives in public housing can say that, and it makes Susan Price furious.
There's people out there that want to get over on the government and take advantage of things. That's not right. It's just absolutely not right.
It's not just an issue in her housing development. It's also a problem in the smaller Elizabethton Housing and Development Authority. We found a family of 3 whose annual income for this year was projected at $76,000. When you see that, what do you think?
Why don't they buy a house?
While they live comfortably, more than 120 others are on a waiting list to move into units here. People who are jobless, homeless, divorced, elderly, or disabled. And what does Kelly Gigley have to tell them?
They need housing today. And we're saying, okay, based on your bedroom size, it may be 6 months to a year before there's a vacant unit available. And you know, what happens to those people?
Not only are they taking up space, they're receiving some government benefits. People who live here get free garbage pickup. They get a big discount on their light bills, and they can use and drink as much water as they like for free. The Housing Authority pays their water bills. While the average family here makes just above $9,000, 47 other households are considered above the federal poverty guidelines, including 2 one-person units. Those 2 people each make more than $40,000. At the same time, Gigley says a family of 6 is trying to make it on $26,000. Is this something that you'd like to see the federal government take a look at?
Yes, sir. I think that would be a good thing.
I'm not against them putting a cap on the income limits in public housing at all.
The Johnson City Housing Authority's executive director also supports a federal investigation. He says the problem goes well beyond the Tri-Cities.
I think it's nationwide.
At the least, it's an issue in Tennessee. Nashville's Metropolitan Development and Housing Agency reports 26 households that make more than $50,000, including 5 with incomes above $60,000, 4 that make more than $70,000, and 2 families of 4 that make $80,000 plus. Meanwhile, Chattanooga Housing Authority has 4 families that make more than $50,000, including 2 in the 60s. Over at Knoxville's Community Development Corporation, there's 1 family that makes more than $50,000 and another that takes home $66,000. And 8 hours west of here, Memphis Housing Authority has a family of 2 that makes more than $50,000.
I think they just get comfortable.
Back in Elizabethton, Kelly Gigley says public housing was not created to be permanent. Instead, it's supposed to help in emergencies and ultimately transition people into regular homes. He says luckily that's now happening with the authority's wealthiest family that makes $76,000. One of the 3 people who live there has since moved out, bringing the household's income down to $44,000.
When people leave for the right reasons, hey, I found a house, or I've bettered myself, we're happy for them.
Gigley hopes others follow that lead. Nate Morabito, News Channel 11, in your corner.
Now, we also reviewed the income in Abingdon and Rogersville. Overall, they were much lower. Rogersville Housing Authority had just 1 household above $40,000, 4 others above $30,000. Meanwhile, Abingdon Redevelopment and Housing Authority reports its highest paid households both make around $34,000.
A News Channel 11 investigation revealed some people in public housing are making $50,000, $60,000, even $70,000 a year. Our investigation has since prompted an area congressman to ask the Inspector General to investigate our findings on a national level and report back to Congress. Well, new at 6, another TV station, this one in Middle Tennessee, now shows how pervasive the problem is, something we actually just told you a few weeks ago. Congressman Phil Rowe sent a second letter addressed to the Inspector General citing information from a similar investigation conducted by TV station WSMV. In it, the findings revealed some families making as much as $81,000 a year were tenants living in federally subsidized housing. Meanwhile, 4,000 other families still remain on the waiting list.